Welcome back. Now, in the light of Buffalo losing their 10th straight, winless in 10, go there. Because not all the losses have been in regulation, some of them in extra time. So, winless in 10. I'm not going to go through the 10 games. Normally, I go through the 10 games and go, here's where things are lost, here's where they're doing well. But we just talked about Buffalo, last week? So, I don't feel like, bringing all that back up, regurgitating all that same information. And at that point, it kind of feels like you're picking on the Buffalo Sabres or their fans too, right? So today, owner Terry Pagula comes in to meet with the team in Montreal. Coming out of the team meeting that they had, practice was canceled, and there hasn't been anything else since then. That was reported by Eric Engels about an hour ago, and so I've kind of been waiting. Like, okay, so is the hammer going to fall? If you have an owner come in, there's one of two things he's doing. Either he's saying, guys, we're gonna figure this out. I believe in you. I'm not trading people. Or don't make any summer plans in Buffalo because you're probably going to be on the move, kind of thing, right? Maybe telling them we're going to be making some changes. And when the owner comes in, maybe that means there's going to be some changes, including Kevin Adams. So let the speculation run rampant in Buffalo, which it already was. So right now the record's 11, 16, and 4. And I don't want to go through too much of this because, again, it feels like it's information we've talked about very recently in the video I did on the struggles of Buffalo and the never-ending rebuild, right? So last year at this time they were 13, 15, and 3. The previous year 15, 14, and 2. So they're worse than they were last year and the year before at this time. And 2021, 2022 they were 10, 16, and 5. So not being in the hunt for a playoff spot is nothing new for the Buffalo Sabres. The fans, as I talked about in the last video, the attendance showing that there's been a drop in terms of interest in the city of Buffalo. Somebody did ask too, is this something we've seen around the league with other teams? Maybe it's just economically related. I'm sure economics has something to do with it too, but a lot of teams in the NHL, their attendance has stayed really, really high. Buffalo's dropping as much as it has to be alarming for owner Terry Pagula, right? So looking at this team, and when Kevin Adams was hired June 16th of 2020, and there's the possibility that maybe the team's considering making a change, maybe they're not. Maybe Adams' job is 100% safe. But I wanted to look at some of the notable trades that he's made. So April 10th of 2021, he trades Brandon Montour to Florida for a 2021 third round draft pick. Looking back at this, it's a mistake. And asset management's been a problem for the Buffalo Sabres before Kevin Adams. There was a lot of talk about Jason Botterill and his asset management. I remember Darcy Regier being criticized for asset management when players left and they got nothing back, right? That one summer where you watch as two really big names in the organization leave and the Sabres never really recover from that. That's '07, right? So April 11th of 2021, the next day, they trade Taylor Hall and Curtis Lazar to Boston for Anders Bjork and a 2021 second-round draft pick. Honestly, I don't mind that trade because that Hall contract, moving that out, made a lot of sense for Buffalo at the time. Lazar's a bottom six forward. Didn't really hurt Buffalo losing Lazar there. July 23rd of 2021, they trade Rasmus Ristolainen to Philadelphia in exchange for Robert Haig, a 2021 first, which became Isaac Rosean, and a 2023 second-round draft pick. I don't mind this trade either, to be honest. Ristolainen's contract in Philadelphia has been discussed plenty, and I'm sure for Buffalo, it was a move that they were probably pretty happy with after it took place. So this trade in particular, I don't have a problem with either. And that's the weird thing is looking at the trades made by Kevin Adams, usually they're not bad, but there are some notables here. So July 24th of 2021, the next day, he trades Sam Reinhart to Florida for Devin Levi and a 2022 first-round draft pick, which became Kulich. Now, Reinhart's gone to Florida and become one of the best forwards in the National Hockey League. And it's damning of the Buffalo Sabres that they weren't able to find a way to keep him around, that they weren't able to find a way to get him to stay in Buffalo and extend him. If you extend Reinhart, if you keep Eichel and find a way to keep him happy, maybe we're talking about a different scenario here. And I'm saying maybe because the Buffalo Sabres, it just feels like throughout the last almost 15 years now, it's Murphy's Law that runs this team more than anything else. Whatever can go wrong does, in fact, go wrong. So November 4th of 2021, so just a few months after July, where you see Reinhart get traded, we see Jack Eichel traded to Vegas. Now, before the trade from Buffalo, Eichel wanted to get back surgery done that no NHL player had ever had done before. So the Buffalo Sabres were like, no, you're not getting that surgery done. We're not going to okay it. It's not going to happen. Now, when we look back at the Jack Eichel saga and all the surgery stuff, it definitely seems like Eichel was right. Eichel's playing the best hockey of his career right now with the Vegas Golden Knights. And it's one of those things that at the time there was plenty of debate. I remember people supporting the Sabres perspective of, hey, if no NHLers ever had this surgery done before, then yeah, it's experimental and you don't want to take that risk. But Eichel looks fine. Sure, it took him a while to come back after that trade, but he looks fine. If Buffalo had worked with Eichel, who knows where the team and Eichel would be. But I do remember, too, while Eichel was in Buffalo, their failures a lot of the time were placed on him. With Eichel makes $10 million a year, this team should be better. He's the problem. Move Eichel out. That's your problem. That's where it is. It's Eichel. And so they trade him. November 4th, 2021, he's traded, along with a 2023 third-round draft pick to the Vegas Golden Knights for Alex Tuch, Peyton Krebs, a 2022 first, which becomes Ostland, and a 2023 second, which was then flipped to Minnesota. So, and became Riley Heidt. So, anybody wondering who that pick became, it was Heidt. So, for Vegas, you get Eichel, you get a Stanley Cup in 2023, it's worth the money. It's worth letting him have the surgery and having the time off. And for Buffalo, they continue to spin their wheels. So Eichel's in the Hart conversation. Eichel is seen as one of the best all-around forwards. I think Selke consideration is going to happen with him at some point. Maybe this year. In upcoming years, sure. Eichel's become one of the most, well-rounded NHL top forwards that we have. And along with Reinhart being in that category as well. And look at all the shorthanded goals Reinhart's putting up. It was a big flub on the part of the Buffalo Sabres to not be able to keep these players and keep them happy to be members of the Buffalo Sabres. The discussion out of last week's palm trees, taxes, excuses from Adams. And I'm saying excuses because Eichel was willing to stay here. And they moved him. And he was willing to stay. All of the surgery stuff is where he's like, all right, well, I guess I'll go. But if they'd said, all right, we trust you and your doctors, have the surgery you want, we might be looking at a different situation. One of the things that's not discussed by Kevin Adams last week that should be is when these players are traded out and they have success elsewhere, I'd be very surprised if at some point in time the conversation doesn't come up, whether it's at a bar, whether it's at a restaurant, whether it's on a flight, of, I am so glad I'm not in Buffalo anymore. My God, guys, I got to tell you about when I was in Buffalo. Because guys talk, guys tell stories. It's part of the reason Spit and Chicklets is so popular. You get hockey players telling stories. Sometimes they get in trouble for those stories, right? But they're entertaining. They're entertaining stories, and I am sure that guys like Eichel and Reinhart have plenty of stories about their time in Buffalo. And so that gets mentioned and talked about. If Buffalo had success, if Buffalo had kept Eichel, Reinhart, and others, and they were content and producing, and the team was doing well, you'd have a much easier time attracting free agents. You'd have a much easier time getting players to not include you on the do not trade list. I almost guarantee that when a player is putting in a 6-team no trade list, Buffalo's going to be on a lot of them. And I say that as a Canuck fan that knows at one point not too long ago, Vancouver was on most of them. And very often it's Canadian teams and Buffalo are on the list, right? I don't want to go and play in Canada, but I don't want to play in Buffalo either. And to get off those lists, it has to get better for the players. And that's the great mystery with Buffalo, is how you're going to make that work. So getting back to the trades, March 6th of 2024, they traded Casey Middlestad to Colorado for Bowen Byram. I think Byram's a very good defenseman, and I've seen... So Elliot Friedman gets things started up this morning, basically just, throwing out there, well, I could see, Buffalo, maybe Cousins and Byram to Vancouver for Pettersson. No. Coming from a fan of the Canucks, my answer is no. Pettersson's been playing really well lately, so no. I understand, though, where Friedman's coming from. The Canucks need a defenseman, yes. Could they also use to save a little bit of money? Probably. But for Buffalo, I don't know that necessarily fixes anything. I don't know that it does. And I don't know that you could talk Pettersson into going to Buffalo either. So that's one thing to throw out there, because if Buffalo's going to fix this, getting a big name player into the lineup who can produce could help. Now, June 29th, 2024, this is still a head-scratcher for me. They trade a 2024 second-round draft pick to Washington for Beck Malenstein. I understand that a second-round draft pick, the odds of them ever being an NHL star, not high. But it just felt like for Beck Malenstein, second-round draft pick felt high to me for a player that we know is going to be in that bottom six. And they look to revamp the bottom six and make it faster, which I think it has been, but that's not going to make that difference to whether or not you're winning games necessarily, right? July 5th of 2024, they trade Matt Savoy to Edmonton for McLeod and Tullio. I think this trade's worked out pretty well. Savoy has yet to play with the Edmonton Oilers. He's still young, potential's still there, but McLeod has been good for Buffalo. And there are some good players here, but are there great players here? And I think there's a legit question to be asked of that. So since 2019-2020, looking at their scorers, Rasmus Dahlin's been their number one point producer. 379 games played, 63 goals, 204 assists for 267 points. Dahlin is a fantastic defenseman. And I would think that if they do decide, well, we're open for business, Dahlin would be untouchable. As I think Tage Thompson would be as well. 292 games, 138 goals, 119 assists, 257 points. Alex Tuch, probably not untouchable, but, I mean, you'd want to get a good return for him. 230 games, 79 goals, 122 assists, 201 points. Dylan Cousins, 311 games, 72 goals, 107 assists, 179 points. Cousins not having the kind of season this year that I think they'd envisioned for him. He may end up being traded, but if you look on the board, you'll see when they trade young forwards, it tends to come back and bite them a little bit. So, looking at the draft, and I just wanted to go through draft notables today too, talking about Buffalo. They do draft Eichel number 2 in 2015. Eichel's had a fantastic career. 2016, 8th overall, they draft Alex Nylander, who did not pan out, but I understood what they were doing drafting Nylander 8th, because William Nylander, pretty good, brother and all that. And at 54th, they draft Luukkonen. I did see a post today from one person saying, well, Buffalo's problem is they don't have a goaltender, and that's where they're at. No, Luukkonen's a very good goaltender. That's when I see those kinds of posts, I assume they're people who are just looking at the stat sheet, and they're not necessarily watching the games, right? So Luukkonen's been good for them. I don't think goaltending is necessarily the problem. I do see criticism of Devin Levi, which is weird to me, because for a goaltender, Levi's still young. He's still figuring it out. And I think the worst thing that they can do with Levi is just throw him to the Wolves. So I hope that's not going to be the case here. 2018, drafting first overall, they get Rasmus Dahlin. Talked about him. 32nd overall, they draft Matthias Samuelsson. Very good defensive defenseman who does have trouble staying in the lineup, staying healthy. 2019, they draft Dylan Cousins, 7th overall. Ryan Johnson, 31st overall. 2020, they draft Quinn, 8th overall. Now, he had a couple of goals last night. So if you're looking for positives as a Sabres fan, there's that. But the overall picture for Quinn this year has not been pretty. Peterka drafted 34th overall. That's a hit. Peterka is a good top 6 forward. And there are some good top 6 forwards here. 2021, they draft Owen Power 1st overall. 2022, they drafted 3 times. Matt Savoy, who of course has been moved. He was drafted 9th. 16th, they draft Ostland. And 28th, they draft Kulik. So Ostland, still the chance he could be a player for them sooner rather than later, and Kulik in the lineup and showing some good skill, and I think there's a lot of potential there. 2023, They draft Zach Benson 13th overall, which I felt like was a really good idea. And I think with Benson, there's a lot of potential there. And then in 2024, drafting 14th overall, they draft Consta Hellenius. And Hellenius is seen as a pretty good, NHLer of the future as well. I don't know if this team needs like another big superstar. I don't know if Tage Thompson on his own can get this team over the finish line. And I'm not sure how to fix everything. And I went through this when I was talking about the team being in a never-ending rebuild and having all those numbers on the board. But I don't know that Kevin Adams has necessarily been the number one problem, even though we can look at these trades and come back to it and say, if you'd found a way to keep Sam Reinhart, if you found a way to keep Jack Eichel, and yet at the same time, a lot of these players who are currently on the team have signed long-term extensions. They have good cap hits. But I do understand why when July 1st rolls around, players go, I'd rather not go to Buffalo. I get it. And you have to make it where players look and go, you know what? I like what they're doing right now in Buffalo. I believe in that. I think that could be good. I think Ottawa's had that at times. I think Detroit's had that for them at times as well. Buffalo really hasn't. The 1 year where they're 1 point out of the playoffs, if they'd made the playoffs that year, who knows? Maybe the narrative changes at least a little bit, but they fell just short. And then the following year, rather than building on that momentum, they fell backwards. And this has been the problem for the Buffalo Sabres. It's one step forward and then, 40 steps back. It's what it feels like. So we are at a point where something has to give. But when a team's been in a rebuild for as long as Buffalo has, look, they're drafting second back in 2015, and things haven't got a lot better since then. So something's got to change, something's got to give, but where? So, like, if you do fire Kevin Adams, who's replacing him? I don't think Scotty Bowman's coming out of retirement to run this team. And you're going to need a GM who players look at and go, now that guy knows what he's doing. Let's see what Buffalo's going to do. You need to give the players a reason to kind of turn their heads towards the Sabres rather than away from the Sabres. And that is I think it's a difficult task because Buffalo's been this bad for this long. And the 10-game winless streak that they're on right now is just another example of how a team that's looked promising at points this year has completely and totally fumbled. And I think that you can point a finger at a number of different factors here. And I don't put it on the market. Buffalo's a very good hockey market. Buffalo has supported hockey for 50 plus years. So it is not the market. So that's not the problem. And I really do think that if this team was winning and was above the playoff line and was doing really well, and if there was, a lot of upward momentum and excitement around the organization, you wouldn't have much trouble attracting players. So it is a question of how you get there. And the longer this goes on, the more difficult it gets for Buffalo. It really does. It just gets more and more difficult. Because you've got now a whole generation of players who will think, oh, Buffalo, I'd rather not go to Buffalo. I don't want to be drafted by Buffalo. I'd rather not. Yeah, it's a great market and all, but I'd rather not. And it gets more and more difficult the longer this takes place. And it's a shame because they brought back the goat head. They did. They brought back the goat head. And maybe at some point they completely change their branding over and this becomes the look again. But you can change the branding however you'd like. You've got to improve what's on the ice. You've got to improve the product. And I'm not really certain on how that's going to take place. So we'll see what happens. Does Kevin Adams lose his job? Well, I'm sure we'll know by this afternoon, later tonight, what exactly was said in that meeting that, the team comes out and cancels practice. But it's a tough time for Buffalo. And going into that game tomorrow night in Montreal, we'll see. Can they win against Montreal? I don't know. Montreal seems to be kind of relaxed. They're kind of having fun. Even though they're 4-5-1 in their last 10, Montreal, I think, is probably a much, in in a much better place mentally than the Buffalo Sabres. The Sabres, like last night, they had a lead on Toronto. They were playing well. And then as soon as the puck goes in their net and the play starts going the other way, it just all falls apart. Absolutely, it all falls apart. They're right up there with Chicago in terms of that fragility there. Chicago being a team that scored first goals in games more than anybody else, and then the other team scores, and it just rolls in the other direction. Chicago finds ways to lose the game. The difference being Chicago, we know, is in a rebuild, and it's still going to be another long year. Buffalo has been in this rebuild a long time. Acquiring assets, draft picks, prospects should not be the focus right now. And that's where we're headed, is towards them acquiring more first-round draft picks, more prospects, more young players, and that's problematic. That's absolutely problematic. They need to find a way to make themselves an attractive destination for players via trade and via free agency. How do you do that? Let me know your thoughts. Hit like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Thank you guys so much for watching. And I just wanted to do this different than the video I did on Buffalo last week because I didn't want to just go through all the same information. So let me know your thoughts. Don't forget to hit those like and subscribe buttons. I will talk to you again soon.